bread. I've made a video about this before, but the way I make it now is quite different from the last video. So if you're still making that one, good for you. The reason why I had to change is because we no longer use wheat. We were using organic wheat, but it was still a modern variety of wheat. And what today is sold as wheat is typically a grain that has been around since about the mid-1800s. And the gluten structure found in that wheat is very different from ancient grains. And I found that Isaac's asthma and our seasonal allergies in our family in general are triggered by that wheat, and that we've been greatly able to reduce those symptoms by switching to a different kind of grain, which is an ancient form of wheat. It's actually genetically different. And to read more about that, there's a great book that I can recommend called Wheat Belly, and it explains all about the genetic makeup and the gluten in the different strands of wheat. That's not what this video is about. I just wanted to show how I make our new sourdough bread, because the gluten found in Einkorn, which is the wheat that I use now, the ancient wheat, is a weak gluten. It doesn't hold the structure as well. So one thing I found very helpful is this cookbook, Einkorn, and it's put out by the Jovial Foods brand company. And there are tons of recipes in here, and every one of them has been a great success, so I recommend this book very strongly. I'm not affiliated with them. I don't get a kickback. It's just a great book. You can tell I've really used it extensively. The loaf I'm going to show you how to make today is actually this one on the front here. It's like an artisan bread. So I have to get the dough started at night, which is actually quite convenient because in the morning all I have to do is set it to rise and then bake it. So tonight I mix up the dough, and I will show you that. It does assume that you have a sourdough starter. Now on page 10 and 11 of this book, it shows you how to start your own sourdough starter, and then it also shows you how to feed it. And if you follow these instructions, it will turn out well. Of course, you can also get an Einkorn sourdough starter from a friend that already has it. If you're local to the greater Phoenix area, you're more than welcome to stop by, and I will share my starter with you. Just a quick word on the starter. I really prefer this to a traditional sourdough starter because it only uses a very small amount, and you will see this as I get into the bread baking. You can see this jar here is a 4-ounce jar, and that's all the starter there is because it only uses a small amount. So I used to have to keep a gallon jar of starter in my fridge. Now I just keep a quart jar, so that's great. That's all in here. I have slightly tweaked the recipe of the loaf that is in here. The one that I use is the no knead overnight bread on page, I don't know because I haven't memorized, so it's in there. The classic French here is no knead overnight artisan loaf on page 31. So my recipe is going to be a slight adaptation of that, but it goes along the same line. So basically you only need a few basic ingredients, and I prefer to weigh them all out just because that's the most accurate with the Einkorn. So I'm going to go straight into my mixing bowl. Okay, so I start with 400 grams of water. And to these 400 grams of water, I add 60 grams of starter. This is my starter. Now usually I feed the starter at least once per week, and often right after I bake bread. So it only needs about 60 grams, which this is not a lot, as you can see. That's 45, so I need just a little more. And it smells like yogurt. It smells like fresh, unflavored yogurt. So I have 61 grams here. And then a half tablespoon of salt. I just guesstimate that. And 720 grams of flour. Now I use the Jovial brand all-purpose flour. Sometimes in my sourdough I also use whole wheat Einkorn flour, but I will say that I have gotten virtually completely away from using any whole grains, and I will talk about that a different time. The whole grains, unless they're properly prepared, either in a sourdough or by sprouting or soaking, the phytic acid in the whole grain actually can leach minerals from the body and can contribute to cavities. And I know that in the past our family has really had problems with that in spite of a healthy diet. And since I eliminated the whole grains, that has gone completely away. So that's why I use the all-purpose white flour. So 720 grams. Now at this point you can just simply stir it by hand. It is a pretty wet dough. I prefer, just for this particular loaf, to use my KitchenAid. So I'm going to knead this up in the KitchenAid. Okay, so I've got my KitchenAid here, and I'm just going to keep an eye on it so you can see when it's done and what to look for. This is on speed 3 of my particular KitchenAid, but of course everybody's is different. And you want to knead it only until all the flour has been incorporated off the sides of the bowl. All right, there you have it. We have a ball and we have the bowl clean. It's kind of tacky. And if anything, it seems the dough seems like it's the right consistency now. What's unique about the einkorn is that it absorbs moisture at a different rate, at a much slower rate than regular flour does. So even though it looks like a nicely shaped ball right now, by the time it's done in the morning, you will see that it looks very different. So I'm simply going to take this down here, and I'm going to cover this with a towel and just leave it in my oven overnight. Just the oven, of course, off. Leave it in my oven overnight to rise. So this is my jar with the starter that I just used. I would not normally feed it yet because there's still a lot in here. I would say at least enough to make 2 or 3 more loaves. You can go down to as little as 2 teaspoons of the starter left, and if you feed it, it will come back. So I typically would not feed it yet. It only has to be fed once a week. I've even let it go for as long as once every 2 weeks, and it did just beautifully. It's a very good starter. I will show you how I feed it right now though, just so you have that on the video too. So I start by, first of all, putting all my starter in a bowl. And I find these rubber spatulas very helpful for that. And the einkorn gives it a beautiful yellow hue. It is a very pleasant flour to work with. It's very fine and silky, and it has a beautiful yellowish color to it, almost like an egg yolk. And it is actually the same exact nutrient in it. It's the lutein that you would find in a rich egg yolk. Is also, einkorn is very high in lutein, and it gives it that beautiful yellow color. So I just get everything out of my jar, and I put it in a bowl, a fresh clean bowl. And you want to set this to soak right away, or it just cements in there. And then to this, I add 56 grams of water. Now this recipe is in the book that I'm recommending. 56 grams of water. And it's regardless of how much starter there is. I think in the book they say, you know, to certain amounts to feed it if you have certain amounts of starter. I just feed it the same amount regardless of how much starter it is, and it's always worked out. So I've got 56 grams of water in here, roughly thereabouts, and 100 grams of flour. That, and I just mix this up, and you will see that sometimes it helps if you just let it sit for a little while, because it'll help the starter that was already in there to soften a little. But you just mix it up, and it will actually come out pretty dry, because again it comes back to the flour, the einkorn absorbing fluids very slowly. So when you're first done mixing this, it looks really splotchy and dry, and like there's a lot of unabsorbed flour in it. But that's totally fine. Just mix it together. And you want to use a rubber spatula for this because it is very sticky and gooey. So this is enough to get it going. And I just take a new quart jar, a fresh one, and I plop it in there. There's that. And then I put the lid back on. And if you look at it, you can see that it has these dry spots, and I just want to get this on camera so that you can see what it compares to in the morning. In the morning, it'll all be moist, just totally spread out, and have about doubled in size. So I'm leaving this on the counter overnight, but tomorrow morning when it's done rising, I will move it to the fridge, and it will stay in the fridge until the next time I feed it. Okay, so here we have the starter. Just wanted to show you what it looks like the next morning. You can see all the bubbles here where it has nicely fermented. And at this stage, I'm going to move it into my refrigerator. And it will stay in there, and I just pull it out when I use it and put it back in, and I will feed it again in about a week. And then here we have the dough that has sat in the oven overnight. The oven was off, but it's still nice and warm. You can see that that nicely shaped ball has now risen and about doubled in size, and is quite a bit more moist than it was yesterday. Now, what I'm going to use this bread basket to help it rise. You can buy these on Amazon very inexpensively, and it just gives it that beautiful rustic look of an artisan loaf on the outside. The only thing I'm going to do here is flour it, and then I like to use a little spatula to scrape it all out. The recipe in the book I find is a little bit too moist, and it makes it too hard to work with. It's very sticky. By adjusting the amount of water and flour to the 400 grams of water and 720 grams of flour, I find it yields a better loaf, and it still rises beautifully, and it's just easier to work with. It is still very sticky. I'm just quickly giving this a once over twice and popping it in here. And at this point, I'm going to cover it again and let it sit for another half an hour to an hour. Okay, so it's been about a half hour, and the bread has not risen significantly, but you can tell that it has risen a little bit. I'm going to now put it in the Dutch oven that I'm going to be baking it in. Now, this Dutch oven is actually I'm going to be using it upside down. This is the Dutch oven, and this is the lid. I recommend this particular one. To get a good crust on the artisan loaf, you really want to bake it in a Dutch oven. This is a cast iron made by Lodge, and it's great because it has the pot, but you can actually use the lid. It's made to where you can use the lid as a skillet, so it kind of does a double duty. And I find this size perfect for making this bread. Now I will be inverting the loaf into the lid. That's why I said I'm using it upside down. And just simply place this over here, invert it, and it should come right out. And that bread basket gave it that beautiful look. Now I use this knife. It's a special knife for slicing bread, and it's really just a straight razor on a plastic handle. I recommend this because it just really easily slices this loaf, but you want to keep it out of the hands of little kids. So the minute I'm done using it, I put this back up high in the kitchen cupboard, out of the reach of the kids. And I'm just simply going to set this in a cool oven right now and allow it to rise for about another 20-30 minutes. When it has risen, I will then start baking it. So it's going to do one more second rise this morning. Okay, so here's the loaf. It's only been about 20 minutes. My kitchen is very warm this morning because I was making other stuff. It's risen, and you can see that where the cuts were. You can see how it has the bubbles in there now. So at this point, in order to make it to where it's really has a good crumb on the inside, moist crumb, but a crunchy crust, you want to get steam in there, and that's where the Dutch oven comes in. So I'm putting on the lid, and I'm moving this into the oven. I offset the lid on purpose because at the very end, when the loaf is done baking, I remove the lid and let it bake without a lid for the last 5 minutes. And if you line them up exactly, if you have oven mitts on, because this cast iron gets very hot, obviously, it's almost impossible to remove. So I find that it's easy if I offset the lid from the bottom for when I remove it. And then I'm going to put this in an oven at 450 degrees. And it's just going to bake for 30 minutes, and then I will remove the lid. Okay, so it's been 30 minutes, and all I'm going to do while the oven is still at 450 degrees is remove the lid very carefully. There's the loaf, and giving it 5 more minutes with the lid off will just help it to become a little bit more crunchy and golden. So I'm doing that. Now, the cast iron is very hot. And if you have little children, I recommend, this is what we do in our house, I put a towel over it and I push it all the way back. That way the kids know this cast iron is hot. Don't touch it. They don't accidentally think it's cold and touch it. So 5 more minutes. Okay, 5 minutes have gone by. And you can see the loaf now has a much better color. Still very hot, so I'm going to just put this right back here, out of the reach of the kids. And I'm going to move the bread itself to a cooling rack. But here it is, this beautiful loaf. And it has a really good crust, but inside it's chewy. I'm going to leave this sitting here for 30 minutes, hour to cool, and then it'll be ready in time for lunch. Okay, so here's the loaf. It's nice and cool now. It's still a little warm. It actually makes the perfect sandwich when it's still slightly warm. I'm going to slice just a few slices to show you the inside. So here you can see the inside has a nice soft crumb and a crunchy crust. And we've got the sliced bread here. And the way our family likes to eat this is slathered in butter. Everything is better with butter, of course. And then cheese on it. Now Costco here in Arizona carries this Romano brand organic sliced cheddar. It is so good. Romano is a California cheese company, so you can probably get in California too, but they have the best cheese. Not affiliated with them either, but they sell this wonderful sliced cheddar, and that on here makes the best sandwich. So I've got a taste tester right here.
Love it.
I'm glad you like it. All right, I hope you enjoyed this tutorial and make your own bread, and tune in again for more homemaking tips.